We have been discussing the sex scandal that has now engulfed Bishop Eddie Long of New Birth Missionary Baptist Church in Lithonia, Georgia, right here outside of Atlanta. I want to bring back our panel now. Columbia University Professor Marc Lamont Hill, TV host of Our World with Black Enterprise, and then Tulane University Professor Shane Lee. Also, Ted Haggard, now pastor of the St. James Church in Colorado Springs. Thank you guys for talking about this. It was tough to play that for the members of the church. They were so young, but, you know, this is reality here. So listen, the woman who is representing the plaintiffs here, the young men, B.J. Bernstein, a very prominent attorney, and B.J. Bernstein doesn't mess around. I mean, she did Janarla Wilson, who was involved, the young man, Marc Lamont Hill, you may know him, represented him, got him off. It was a very big case. She talked about this case and just why she thought that she would take it on, and she said bring it into federal officials. Take a look at this.
And I can tell you, this gives me the creeps beyond anything I've ever heard, because for someone to use their power and be their pastor and use biblical verses when he is out in front and listed by the Southern Poverty Law Center as one of the most homophobic preachers in America. And so he makes these virulent anti-homosexual remarks, and at the same time he's leading apparently some sort of double life. And these young men are confused. They're confused about their sexuality, because at the same time this is happening, they're actually wanting to meet girls. One of these young men is the father of a child, because they aren't gay. They just wanted to be loved and cared for by one of the most powerful, charismatic men that the churches have ever known.
I was looking at you gentlemen's faces as that was going on. Ted, this looks like it pains you.
Well, the human condition is painful, because anybody with a set of ideals, especially somebody obligated to teach the scriptures, has that set of ideals, and then they've got their inhumanity. What stressed me earlier was when you interviewed the church members, how they said he did so many good things, he couldn't have done this. That is not true. It's not reflective of the human condition. Every pastor is a sinner, while at the same time is a saint. And
Mark?
It's a percentage thing. He's a human communicating divine things. And so that struggle is universal, and everybody has to accept that one way or another.
I need to interject here, because I think that there is a homophobic undertone that has governed this entire conversation, not just with Ted, but in the media in general. You know, as Ted points out, the inhumanity of Eddie Long, if there's something about him that's fundamentally problematic, it has nothing to do with homosexuality or heterosexuality. It has to do with the exploitation of his members. You know, B.J. Bernstein, who I have extraordinary respect for, I've actually worked with her to help free Janarla Wilson. Whether or not these boys are gay or not isn't even the point. There's nothing exculpatory about being straight. The point here is that a preacher has exploited his flock. That's the problem, and as long as we continue to prosecute this in a way that sort of reinforces homophobia, both in the church and in our communities, we're going to continue to have problems like this. That's why people like Eddie Long can go out there and be virulently homophobic, and at the very same time prey upon the bodies of his flock.
Hey, so listen, B.J. Bernstein speaks to that. Number 3, guys, play that, and then we'll talk about it.
He would use biblical stories to talk about how important it was to follow your leader and your master, and let him know that the acts that he was engaged in were not necessarily meaning that he was a homosexual or that either of them was, but rather the pastor, Bishop Long, was releasing his passion and his love for Anthony.
Shane, what do you think of that and what Mark said? There is an underlying homophobia, not only with this case, the way this case is presented, but also with the media and the way it's being interpreted in the public.
You can go back to any James Baldwin novel that deals with the church to see the black church as a hotbed of sensuality, and at times powerful people exploit people under them to yield to those temptations. But the difference here is, if Bishop Long were accused by women, I think there would be, even if he was guilty, there would be a chance that he could survive. The fact that the black church has such a strong stance, or I should say black churches have strong stances against homosexuality, that presents this in a whole different light as far as damaging his career. I think if these allegations even hold partially true, to show him as someone who has same-sex erotic urges, his ministry is done.
So, Ted, we're talking about the black church here. Is the black church, do you think, more homophobic in a sense than the white church?
I think I think that the mainline churches are much less, but my experience was that evangelicalism was, their response to me was incredibly, incredibly harsh because of the homosexual element. And it's much easier culturally if your sin tendency is heterosexual than if it's same-sex attraction. But I think the overall point is the church is not the gathering together of the righteous. It is the gathering together of the gratefully redeemed. And we've got to get over the fact, our leaders, Sunday school teachers, or anybody else, nobody is perfect. Everybody's in process. And I don't say that to justify or explain anything away, just as a lesson in reality that when we exalt people and when we start thinking they're perfect, we're just in for a disappointment. And if it isn't this particular sin, it is another one. All have sinned. Everybody needs redemption.
That's going to have to be the last word. Thank you guys so much. Ted Haggard, Shane Lee, Marc Lamont Hill. A very interesting conversation, a very smart conversation, and no yelling and screaming, just how I like it. Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks, Don.
Thank you.
Have a great evening.
Pleasure.
Look at some